Welcome. In this video, we will bridge between our study of absolutism and that of enlightenment by looking at several key wars that occur in the so-called Age of Reason. A word about warfare in the Age of Reason. The wars begin in a very savage period of religious warfare where everything is fair game because the enemy are heretics and can be slaughtered and brutalized because any gains by killing the enemy can prevent souls from being lost. And so that's considered even worse than despicable acts of war. And so the warfare starts very savage. We're outside the age of chivalry and knights, nor are we yet in the height of the Age of Reason. But as armies move into that period, you see them gain an oath of loyalty to the king, not to the nation, not to a constitution or their people, but they have loyalty to the king, heightening their absolutism. Also note that as in most times of war, there is a distinct difference between the officers and their men, their soldiers. Officers tend to be of the upper class of the nobility, and soldiers very much not so. This is an age of standing armies, where kings would maintain large standing armies to be ready for war at the drop of a hat, and therefore armies tended to get more professionalized. And as they got professionalized, there were armies that even fought for money. They weren't per se loyal to one king, but they would be loyal to their captains and generals, and they would then loan themselves out for hire to those who needed armies for pay, and those were called mercenaries. There's also a period of the campaigning season where when the weather was poor, they would simply retire to their forts and would largely not fight. Now, one of the first and most significant wars we're going to talk about in this period is the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. It's a civil war of religion within the Holy Roman Empire, or Germany. What starts it, or the spark, akin to the Archduke's assassination in the First World War, is an event called the defenestration of Prague. To defenestrate something sounds really nasty, but it means to throw something out of a window. Prague is the capital of Bohemia, or the modern-day Czech Republic. Well, an Austrian Habsburg relative had inherited the throne of Bohemia. The Habsburgs were arch-Catholics, and the Bohemians had become staunch Protestants. And so, partly over religious conflict, you had, and this here is a picture representing the Protestants in Bohemia throwing the poor chap here and this guy here out the window. These were the representatives of the Habsburgs, and when they made their demands known, the Protestants of Bohemia threw them out the second-story window. The guys survived, and they reported back to the emperor what had happened, and it sparked this war. With this, the Holy Roman Emperor and the Catholic princes of the Holy Roman Empire would try to crush the Protestant Union of 150 or so Protestant princes. The power of the Habsburgs and the Catholic princes was too much for the Protestants to bear. They sought allies wherever they could, including the Muslim Ottoman Empire, to join their side and attack the empire. But for the most part, the empire, the emperor, and the Habsburg allies Spain succeeded crushing many of the Protestant princes. At which point, two other Protestant kings join in. The Denmark and Sweden joined the Protestant Union, and the Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus leads the Swedish army with great success. They had a new model army, meaning that they used rolling cannon that they brought with them right up to the front lines with great effect. And believe it or not, the Swedish army made a big impact and began to roll back the Catholic forces until King Gustavus Adolphus was himself killed, and the Swedish army kind of lost some of its effectiveness. And once again, the Habsburgs began to win. And just as it looked as if, in many ways, the Reformation in Germany would be undone and the Catholic side of the Spanish and the emperor would win, France, mostly Catholic France, under the leadership of a Catholic bishop, a cardinal, Cardinal Richelieu, who ran France mainly for his king, Louis XIII, joins the 30 Years' War on the Protestant side, not for religious reasons, but for political ones. The Habsburgs were getting too powerful, and the French wanted to stand in their way. So they did it. And the war, after 30 years of fighting and killing and dying and fighting and killing, ends in effectively a stalemate or a status quo antebellum, the way things were before the war. One of the things they settle on is that same cuius regio, eius religio, who's the region, his the religion. Each of the 300 princes of the Holy Roman Empire could choose for themselves whether to be Catholic or Lutheran. There were some minor territorial readjustments, but essentially did relatively little to change the status of the Holy Roman Empire. What were some of the effects? It was the utter devastation of Germany. The economy was wrecked, and nearly a third of Germans were killed. This map gives you a little bit of a picture of what's going on. You have the Austrian Habsburgs, you have Spain, they also control southern Italy, all fighting against the Protestants here. At one point, the Ottomans joined, the Swedes joined, and France even joined the Protestant side. Most of the fighting took place here in Germany. You see this here is just a zoomed in feature. This map shows the percentage of lives lost in 30 years, with huge chunks of Germany losing over a third and even over half of the people in that area dying a violent death during the 30 Years' War, which is a devastating, devastating war that rampages throughout the Holy Roman Empire, throughout Germany, and leaves it behind its neighbors. Germany is wrecked for many decades, if not centuries. It leaves the Holy Roman Empire permanently weak and divided. It leaves a Catholic Austria and some Catholic princes, but also many Protestant princes. And the 300 German states live in a state of semi-independence, and that lives on. It also serves as the final war of religion in Europe, because countries will no longer play by the rules. If it's a war of religion, then Catholic France, led by a Catholic bishop, should have joined the Catholic Habsburg side. But they cared more about hurting the Habsburgs politically than they did about helping the church defeat people of the other faith. And so it would be pointless, or it would seem very pointless in the future, to fight a purely religious war in Europe for fear that countries that you thought were on your side might join the other side for purely political reasons. Three other quick wars that are not quite as impactful but happen in the early 1700s and are much less savage as they begin to develop those rules of warfare that I spoke about at the very beginning. One is the War of the Spanish Succession. The King of Spain, a Habsburg, dies without an heir. And the Habsburgs in Austria, their cousins, and the Bourbons, who also end up being their cousins because they all tend to intermarry, the Bourbons of France fight for the Spanish crown, essentially. And what we see in this family tree, what happens is King Charles, the King of Spain, dies. Well, his younger sister, who is the daughter of the king, had married the Austrian Habsburg emperor here. And so they had a daughter, and that daughter married a guy, and they had a grandson. So this is the closest male relative to them, because he is the great-grandson of the King of Spain. So he should have been the next King of Spain. But then when he dies in 1699, and then the actual king dies in 1700, the closest Habsburg is actually just the husband of the wife here, right, of the daughter. And actually, she's already dead, and he's married to someone else. Then he dies shortly thereafter, and his son. So they are not directly related to a king of Spain. It's just that his father used to be married to a daughter of the King of Spain. Versus over here in France, you have a young man whose mother is the daughter of a king of Spain. Therefore, they argue he, and then actually his son, are the closest relatives. So these things get very contested, and as you see, that leads us to a war of dynastic succession for the Spanish crown. And essentially, all of Europe now gangs up against who is the new strongest power in Europe, which is France. And they all gang up against the Bourbons of France, and France still mainly wins. They fight very costly wars at heavy losses, but the Peace of Utrecht that they agree to in 1713 does a couple of things. It gives Spain to the French. So the older son of the king will become the king of France. His younger son is the one who can become the king of Spain. And the agreement says they can never unite the two countries, France and Spain. That's part of the deal. And finally, an irony is that Britain, as kind of an outsider, though, makes huge trade gains by getting the asiento, or permission, to trade with the Spanish Empire, which, remember, in this period they're practicing mercantilism, or a closed economic system, and so the British having free access to trade with Spanish colonies is a big deal. A short time later, the War of the Austrian Succession was fought over somewhat similar reasons. Remember, in 1713, that same year the Spanish Succession War ended, in Austria, the King of Austria began to grow concerned for his own daughter. And so it is, in fact, this here, I believe it is Archduke Charles here, whose daughter is Maria Theresa. And what happens is he gets the other princes nearby to sign the pragmatic sanction, or practical approval, is what that effectively means, is the practical approval that his daughter can inherit all of the Habsburg lands, even though in Europe, unlike in England, they generally did not allow women to inherit large territory like that, and particularly the Holy Roman Emperorship. But when he dies, they disregard that. Prussia and even France use that as a pretext or a thinly veiled excuse to attack the Habsburgs anyway. Maria Theresa makes a dramatic appeal with a baby at her breast, nursing. She had something like 12 or maybe even 18 children. I can't remember. She had many children and made a dramatic appeal to the nobles of Hungary to defend her. Moved with compassion, they do, and they pledge their support. And this war also somewhat fights to quite a draw, as both sides have victories and losses. A key shift happens at the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, where Maria Theresa is allowed to continue on the throne. Even though there were those who tried to basically depose her, she succeeds in holding her crown. However, Prussia takes the province of Silesia, which is a resource-rich territory that is basically right here. Okay, and so finally, just a short time later, the 7 Years' War breaks out. And it is accomplished by a sort of diplomatic revolution. Austria and France, and all these previous wars, especially the 30 Years' War, France joined just so they could attack Austria. And now Austria and France are actually allies, because Austria realizes that Prussia is their main enemy, not France, because they want to recover this province of Silesia. And France recognizes that Austria isn't their threat, it really is Britain, because the British Navy and the British colonies pose the more existential threat. So this is actually a huge revolution as it ends the Bourbon-Habsburg rivalry that had driven many of these other wars. In the United States, this was known as the French and Indian War. This is a war in which many Americans, George Washington and others, fought in. It ends with the Peace of Paris in 1763, with Britain taking all of Canada from France and a big chunk of North America. Prussia was able to keep Silesia, and it leaves France broken and without colonies and in economic dire straits. It leaves all of the countries relatively broke, and in fact, the 7 Years' War and the fact that the French colonies have been taken by England and the English have run up quite a debt during this war are both reasons that the American Revolution will happen. So for all those reasons, the wars of the Age of Reason are significant. Next time, we will pick up with a study of the Enlightenment. Thanks for watching.